morning, everyone. Good morning to you. Good morning to you who's just joining us today. It is Sunday morning, the 2nd of October, and we are very happy to be here this morning. We are actually on both pages for the Spiritist Federation of Florida and the Conscious Living Spiritist Group. Conscious Living Spiritist Group, who is celebrating this month 16 years of dissemination of Spiritism, and the Spiritist Federation of Florida, who's been doing some interesting workshops the last few months in English, in Portuguese, and Spanish, trying to really disseminate the message of Spiritism to everyone, regardless of the language that they speak. This morning, we have a very special guest with us, Flavio Zanetti, who's joining us from Boston. And we couldn't be more happy to have him doing the presentation on Allan Kardec, Life and Legacy. So we're really excited to be able to listen to him. But before we do present him, bring him onto the screen, we would like to invite you to do an opening reading of a message from the book Living Spring, and then we will do our opening prayer. So let's get started. It's actually from the book The Way, the Truth, and the Life, and it is message 40, A Time for Trust. And he asked, "Where is your faith?" This is in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verse 25. Where is your faith? The storm had troubled the souls of even the strongest disciples. Disoriented before the fury of the elements, they cry out for Jesus' help. The Master does help them, but then asks, "Where is your faith?" The scene suggests some heavy pondering. Jesus' question clearly points out the need for trust when everything seems dark and lost. In such circumstances, faith will rise to the occasion in its own time. If there is a time for working and resting, for sowing and reaping, trust will also show itself at the appropriate hour. Nobody needs to be optimistic when everything is going well. It is difficult to prove one's friendship in moments of happiness. Of course, disciples should expect opportunities for more struggles, times when they can apply the teachings of the Lord more extensively and intensely. Otherwise, it would be impossible to tell just how much they have grown spiritually. During these dolorous times, painful times, many evoke direct help from Christ. And help always comes, because the heavenly mercy is infinite. But once the difficulty is overcome, there will always be the question, where is your faith? More obstacles will appear until the disciple learns how to serenely control, educate, and overcome him or herself based on the lessons received. Wow, this message was, I opened not really choosing, I went basically by the title itself, but it's amazing how it speaks directly to what happened here in Florida, Fort Myers, the West Coast, Sanibel Island, many of the adjacent or the cities nearby that was actually hit really hard, and now the South Carolina by Hurricane Ian. And I must state that it is at this time that we see the strength of those who really do cultivate their faith as if they were those disciples over 2,000 years ago when the storm was really strong and they were afraid. And Christ asked them, "Where is your faith?" And I need to point out two individuals without saying their names, as to preserve their identity, unless they go on the chat and they're listening and they say, "Go ahead and say it's me," who's actually shown us the Spiritist faith before this calamitous situation here in Florida. It is amazing how trusting they are in Christ, in God, in showing that everything is going to be fine when your life has been kept, when you haven't discarnated and you see destruction before you, you know that you can always start again, rebuild, stronger. Fraternity, solidarity sets in. And these two individuals are examples of just that. So I just wanted to point that out, that faith is possible, even during the most difficult of times. And it is up to us to cultivate that inside of us because we will need it, even when times are not hard or painful. Let us always keep that alive because others will look to us for the faith and strength that holds us up. On this note, let us do our opening prayer in saying, Dear Jesus, benevolent spirits who are with us this morning, we are so very grateful for this opportunity to be connected and be able to listen to another lesson about Spiritism, specifically Allan Kardec, whom we pay homage this weekend, whom we are so grateful for the very hard work that he had for years to try to have us actually be able to finally see the lighthouse in the dark at night and recognize you, dear Jesus, as the sun that shines bright always, always reaching us with your rays, not only calming us after the storm, but also keeping us warm when we feel that it's night and it's cold and we can't see with our spirit eyes. Let us be able to always hear your message, to always be in contact with the benevolent spirits who are here to guide us, to give us strength, to warn us, and to always offer them our counsels. Also bless our friend Flavio, who is dedicating his time this morning to talk about Allan Kardec. We need to talk about him, to think about him, to really live the message that he brought by codifying Spiritism. Thank you for being with us, and so be it. And good morning to you who's just joining us. As we had said in the beginning, we have a very special guest today, Flavio Zanetti, who is joining us from Boston. Good morning, Flavio. So unmute. There you go.
That's the most common word saying today. Are you mute? Anyways, good morning, Andre. How are you today?
Good. Flavio is from Boston. He's from the Allan Kardec, right? Am I right? I am right?
Yep.
Yeah. Spiritist Society, Spiritist group in the Boston area. And he's also a very active disseminator of Spiritism, participating in the program established by the United States Spiritist Federation, even by the Federation of Florida, also our Conscious Living Spiritist group, and many other places in the United States and even abroad. If Kuya is listening, he has been with us in our study groups for a while, and Flavio has actually also been there in the Philippines to see the Spiritist movement and how it is. So we are so blessed to have you with us, Flavio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I'm going to give you the entire space and stop talking. I've talked enough.
Thank you, Andrea. It's so great to be here with you guys once again. It's with my heart filled with gratitude, right, that we're here to spend a few minutes to talk about this singular person that is and has been Allan Kardec to all of our lives. But before we start that, I'd like to offer our sincere good thoughts and positive vibrations to all of our friends from the west coast of Florida. It's so nice to see several people going above and beyond, volunteering, and really helping those who are in need. People offering their houses for folks to stay, right? It's really, truly showcasing the beauty that we learn through Spiritism, that we see our friends carrying out the message across. So again, very, very humbled to see all these examples of folks volunteering and going above and beyond. And on that positive note, congratulations to the Conscious Living Spiritist group for celebrating its 16th anniversary towards the spread of Spiritism in the South Florida region, right? So I'd like for us to keep our thoughts raised after this beautiful prayer that Andrea shared with us. May the good spirits bring really peace to our hearts. They really bring cognition and enlightenment to our minds so that we can really comprehend the message in the same way the same dedication by which or through which we put together to share with you guys this morning, right? So I see the slides already here. I think the one thing that I would like to ask is for all of us to think about is, who is this man that we today know as Allan Kardec? We all know his name is tied to Spiritism, but was he the inventor of Spiritism? Can we say that Spiritism was invented by Allan Kardec? What were his activities? Or what did he do besides really working with Spiritism? What was his legacy? What did he leave us with today that we still pay homage to all his work, his hard work, rather, right? Spread out in several years of his life, dedicated to the helping or to the really broadcasting this new thing called Spiritism. These, my friends, are some of the topics that we'll cover during this morning's dialogue here. If you have any questions or comments, our dear friend Andrea volunteered to help us throughout the presentation here. Just make sure you throw them on the chat. If they're relevant to the conversation here, we'd love to tackle them as we go through. All right? So buckle up. Let's go into and enjoy the journey ahead of us. The first thing I want to mention is 2018 years ago, okay? So a little over 200 years ago, on October 3rd, 1804, at 7 p.m., this man, or a young baby, was born in the small city of Lyon in France. That small city of Lyon had just a few thousand inhabitants back then. And the interesting thing is that Lyon, if you see the map here, is on the southeast part of France. And Lyon, obviously, it wasn't as big as it is today, but Lyon was always the most educational center outside of Paris. So needless to say, there were a lot of knowledge, a lot of, that mindset of having or being an educational center. The second one after Paris back in the days, and still to this date. So on October 3rd, 1804, this person here is born, Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rival. But hang on, Flavio, what about Allan Kardec? Is he the same person, right? We're going to touch that as we go through this. So 200 plus years ago, we really see the birth of this very singular or very unique man called Allan Kardec. The interesting things that I think it's important for us to mention is that his family was Catholic. So he came from a traditional Catholic background, but Allan Kardec himself did not consider him a religious man, despite being from a Catholic family. His parents were really keen towards education. They really did everything they could to help really small Hippolyte achieve or really conquer education. And by the way, if you are a parent watching or listening to us right now, that's our most important task to our children, to really build up on their education, to really educate them. The schools that are out there are responsible to instruct our little ones. But we as parents have the obligation or the task or the mission, so to speak, to bring them education. This is exactly what Allan Kardec's or Hippolyte's parents thought about him, so much so that because of their socioeconomic status, they were able to really afford to send little Hippolyte to the best schools of Lyon, even to the point that when he was 12 years of age, he concluded his studies in Lyon, which is the equivalent of right now our high school system, right? Now let me take a pause here and ask us to think about what were we doing when we were 12 years old? Did we have all that amount of knowledge under our belts when we were 12? Then after little Hippolyte graduated from his studies, his parents sent him to go to a place called Yverdon in Switzerland. Remember, the map of Lyon was very close to Switzerland. And then his parents sent him to go to a very specific school. That was, the dean of that school was Henri Pestalozzi, a Swissman who really was one of the very first pedagogues that really developed the idea of a holistic school in a way that not only the instruction, but also the thoughts and the hands were involved in really becoming an educated person. So much so that Pestalozzi, for example, trained educators such as Joseph Neath, who brought the Pestalozzianism to the United States later on, in the middle of the 19th century, and Friedrich Froebel, if I can pronounce his name correctly, who was the inventor of kindergarten. So if you were in kindergarten, or if your kids were in a kindergarten school, we owe it to Pestalozzi. That's the caliber of an educator that Pestalozzi was, and that's with whom Hippolyte spent a couple of years studying with. So when he was there, when he entered there when he was 12, by the age of 14, he was already teaching his fellow students. He was really mastered in a lot of subjects, including theology, philosophy, astronomy. Hippolyte spoke 8 languages by the time he was 14, and he was even teaching some basic concepts, I should say, of medicine back then. All right? So let me ask you again, what were you doing when you were 14 years old? What were we doing when we were 14 years old? Again, Kardec had spent, or Hippolyte rather, back then, had spent a very good amount of time building up on his knowledge, on his culture, on his access to information, to the point that then he comes back to France and he brings unforgettable number of lessons from one of the greatest educators of all time, Pestalozzi, who's not only educational influence, but also moral influence, would never fail to inspire Hippolyte from that moment onwards. I'll give an example. Pestalozzi obviously would take students from across Europe, but the interesting thing is local students in Switzerland that couldn't afford the monthly fees of that school, Pestalozzi would take him for free. So back then, Pestalozzi was really interested in really developing education for those who could afford and also for those that could not afford. That's the same concept that we see today in the United States, for example, on Ivy League schools. Again, some of the things that Pestalozzi developed, we're still reaping the benefits to this date, my friends, right? Continuing with that vast experience and knowledge and know-how, Professor Rivail, as he came to be known back in France, began his career as a writer and an educator. He will go in to publish several books. He'll go in to found a school in the same lines of the Yverdon Institute, right? Called the Technical Educational Institute, English translation, in 1825. And if you're doing your math correctly, Kardec was born in 1804. This is when he was 21 years of age. He founded a Technical Educational Institute. He worked there for the next 5 years. He published several other books with wide acceptance, not only in France, but also other countries. Some of these books were translated into German, Italian, English, Spanish, and additional languages. Kardec was very well known for being able to teach and talk around subjects around, for example, mathematics, languages, physics, physiology, and astronomy. Needless to say, little Hippolyte was a very well-cultured man that had access to a great amount of education by the time he was in his mid-20s. Then he continues working in the Institute, and then by the time he was 26, he meets this young lady called Amélie Gabrielle Boudet. And then by the time he was 28, so 2 years after that, he married Amélie Boudet. And the interesting thing about this part of the story, of Kardec's life story, is that when he married Amélie Boudet, she was 9 years older than he was. So let's imagine almost 200 years ago, right? And somebody marrying a guy marrying a woman that was way older, that was a huge taboo at the time. Up to recently, there was still a taboo 40, 50 years ago. that was still a taboo from our societal norms. And Kardec was already, right, challenging some of the norms back then. He married this amazing spirit, amazing individual called Amélie Gabrielle Baudet. And their marriage really was destined towards bringing, to humanity a progress that we were due. So we can clearly say that were two souls that had really planned that marriage, that wedding, back in the spirit realm. They were really committed to bringing goodwill to the world. This is the case with Amélie and Hippolyte, right? The benefactor spirit Emmanuel talks to us about twin souls, right? And he really explains to us the concept of twin souls are really when a wedding or a marriage, like Hippolyte and Amélie, are targeted or are so much so they can really develop, they can really carry out a plan or an execution in a way that brings progress to humankind. In the same way that we've seen before with Gandhi and his wife, and just a handful others, right? Other marriages out there that we see this very, very pure commitment of doing great to society. That's clearly an example, right, with Hippolyte and Amélie, a true partnership between the two of them. Then, by the age of 50, so Kardec will go in. He was an educator, as I said. He had a school and all that. So for the next 20 years, he dedicated a lot of his life, of course, with ups and downs, some turmoil, some difficulties and all that. And then, by the time he was 50, he was invited to visit this phenomenon that was the turning tables. There was a phenomenon that was not only found in France, but it was also found here in the United States. There is evidence that even in the White House, this phenomenon took place several times, right? And then he was invited to participate. He was 50 years old and a well-respected professor and a recognized author and writer. So Hippolyte was known throughout France. He was a man of the society. He was a man that people know him. He was an author, a well-respected author and writer. Then he is invited to these turning tables. And they say, this is all, fake news, right? As we call it today. These things don't exist. And just doesn't give a lot of, importance to it. But in these phenomena, we had people from all cultural and background levels, socioeconomic levels, different religions, right? Folks participated in these sessions were from all over the place, not only a certain group of people. And those sessions where we see some physical effects, phenomena taking place, was, the creme de la creme back in the days. Everybody talked about it. Newspapers were talking about it. And in these exhibitions, as we learned from history, the tables moved and swiveled and jumped and made noises. And those movements oftentimes were able to answer some codes or answer some questions that were asked by participants. Although they were carried out for fun as their primary motivation, some of the communications, not all obviously, but some of the communications that were obtained really brought up a level of intelligence, a level of certainty in those answers. And then that deeply intrigued Hippolyte back then. Or Kardec was deeply intrigued when he saw these things happening. And he said, what? Maybe I should go and expose the falsehood of these events, of these turning tables. Then on the second invitation by a person called Monsieur Fortier or Mr. Fortier, Kardec said, what? I'll go there. I'll go there and I'll just see what it is, right? And if you see on this picture on the slide, you see a table that's levitating, or gravitating, I should say, and the table will just turn and answer some of the questions. And then, during a meeting at the Mrs. Plenimazon's house, Kardec himself, or Hippolyte himself, witnessed tables turning, jumping, making sounds. And the most interesting part of all that is that those tables answered questions from people that were present. And then Kardec said, it's impossible that a table with no brain is able to answer these questions. He investigated everything. He was a science man. He was not something that would be eluded or convinced very easily. His thought process was very logical. He spoke several languages. He witnessed in some of these sessions the table answering a question in a language that nobody there spoke, corroborating the fact that that table must know something in that language. So he was really, really perplexed, intrigued, and his level of curiosity went up significantly, to the point that the more he studied, the more he tried to debunk those, festivals or those exhibitions, he concluded that those conditions left no room really for those tables, right, to be a mere, coincidence that those tables were able to answer those questions. Also important to mention is that Kardec was very interested in the newly founded science of magnetism, where today we learn that metals can either attract or oppose to each other, right? Back then there was something new, and he had studied magnetism for 19 years before he was invited to really participate in one of those sessions. He even brought some metals, as we look and see from his biography, trying to debunk the whole idea that those sessions were a flaw or were a fraud, so to speak. Then he concluded, and we must have heard or read, right, in one of his works, that an intelligent effect must really have an intelligent force as its cause. That table, nevertheless, has no brain. How is it that table is able to answer intelligent, eloquent, real questions from participants without having an intelligence to rationalize those questions? Deeply interested and with a solid scientific and philosophical basis, he sort of changes the course of those experiments. Notice why it was important for us to mention all of Allan Kardec's or Hippolyte's background in education, because he was a very cultured man. He was someone that knew what he was saying. He was not a neophyte that was just, coming across a lot of these events right by accident. And then, thanks to his background in all these sciences, all the philosophical studies that he had done, including magnetism, Kardec got more and more involved, right, on those apparent futilities as a hobby people made from those phenomena. But then something a lot more serious starts to kick in on Kardec's minds or Hippolyte's minds, like the revelation of a new law, of a new something, which he took it upon himself to investigate even further. And he started dedicating even more time. He started participating on different sessions, different locations. He started really collecting some of these messages, bringing back home these messages to evaluate or to study later on. So the rigorous that Allan Kardec brought to the beginning of this really speaks a lot about his life, a lot about his mission to really codify Spiritism. Without jumping the horses here in front of the carriage, I see a question. What aren't Spiritists talking more about Kardec? Remembering his importance. I think my personal belief is that oftentimes we fail to study Kardec's life. What was he like? What did he like to do? Why was he so rigorous in what he was doing? Why did he bring all that logical reasoning, the sense, the good sense for that process of those phenomena to really take place? So much so that thanks to all his dedication and commitment, one night, one of the spiritists that communicated was Zephyrus or Zephyr, depending on the translation. And then he appeared and told Hippolyte, right? I have been a protector. I have been your protector spirit. And you and I have lived together in a past existence, by the time that when the Druids were in Gaul, right? And Gaul is the region today in Western Europe that was back from the Iron Age, occupied where France, Belgium, and some other neighboring countries are today. In this picture, however, we see a ceremony, recent ceremony of Druids in the Stonehenge. The Stonehenge movement, if you haven't had a chance to see or check it out, it's an amazing place. These stones are like 30 to 40 feet, tall. They're massive. They weigh multiple tons, and nobody knows how the Druids were able to create that Lego puzzle that we see at Stonehenge today. Nevertheless, the Druids were a very evolved people back in the days, and Hippolyte had lived as a religious person there, and his name was Allan Kardec, hundreds of years before his reincarnation as Hippolyte. And if you're following us for the first time, we Spiritists truly believe on the concept of reincarnation, on the concept that this is not our only life. We have absolutely lived in previous lives before. Science is really trying to show us some events, show us some examples. A lot of scholars have been studying the topic of reincarnation, not only in the Western world, but also in Southeast Asia. Hindus believe in reincarnation. There are a lot of other philosophies and religions out there that believe in reincarnation, and we Spiritists understand the concept of reincarnation, through which, right, God is really able to offer divine justice. Because had we not had the chance to come back and make some amends, correct some wrongdoings, life wouldn't be just as we understand, we Spiritists understand. So I invite you that are following us today, spend more time on reincarnation. There's several books out there that talk about the topic, and through which we can really have a much broader view of our lives today, what we've done in the past, even if we don't remember that, and that's okay. Thanks God, we don't remember that, right? But at least we know at least a sense of what happened to our lives in the past. Here's what, hashtag the invitation for us to go back and study reincarnation. On Zephyr, or Zephyr's communication, he explained to Hippolyte that he actually needed to do some work. There was an invitation for him to get to work. And that invitation, Zephyr said, you know what, Hippolyte? It's really important that you become the compiler or the codifier, different translations, right? The one that really cataloged Spiritism. Because that's what you're being summoned to do by the Spirit of Truth. So if you have read any of Kardec's works, you see that the Spirit of Truth is the author of a lot of messages from the basic works of our books that we know, the Spirit's book, the Gospel, the Medium's book, and so forth. So the Spirit of Truth told Zephyr that Hippolyte was being summoned to carry out those activities, to carry out that work. And he goes even beyond. The Zephyr, the Spirit, told Kardec that his job was going to be to collect those messages and really use all his cognition, all his capabilities to evaluate those messages and to really make sure there was a control for those messages. As we learned later on in the Spirit's book, or rather the Gospel according to Spiritism, something called the universal control of Spirit's teachings. Because they really say and talk to us about three fundamental steps that have to be taken in order for those messages to be true. And even today, we should think about those. The very first one is illogical. Is it reasonable, right? If the message logical and reasonable, okay, first step is checked. The second step is there the unanimous opinion of the majority of the spirits that were communicating? Because if in one session, one spirit say A, another one says nay, there's no unanimity. It's not unanimous. Therefore, the message must not be really coming from elevated spirits. And then the third step is the agreement of revelations coming from different mediums, strangers to each other, from different locations. That's exactly what Allan Kardec did. He collected thousands of messages from those turning table events in a way that he was comparing and contrasting these messages from mediums that had no knowledge whatsoever of each other, and the message or those messages came in the same exact way, really corroborating or sealing the evidence that what he was going to publish was really, really, really the right thing to do or the right thing to publish. Let's take a step into how the mechanics worked back in the days. A little history on how Spiritism really started, right? There's something called automatic writing or psychography, as we call it these days. And the development of these Spiritist ideas basically began in the Boudin's family residence back in 1855, right? Now, let me take a derail here and ask you this. Kardec, my friends, was 50 years old when he got a hold of this phenomenon. So if you are, I'm too old to study Spiritism, don't think that. You're never too old to start anything new. If Kardec himself started when he was 50, and by the way, 50 back then is probably the 70s right now, so we can start studying. We can start really learning more about Spiritism at any age, right? That's what we learn from Spiritism. So in that house, the Boudin's family house, Kardec meets these two sisters, Julie and Caroline, and they were amazing mediums. They were 14 and 16 years back then when they started. In the beginning, Kardec used a bread basket with a pen attached to it, and the mediums will hold the basket to really answer some questions. Then Kardec would ask those questions, and the mediums will respond. The spirits through the mediums will respond through automatic writing or psychography, right? Then, as the teacher's questions, or as Kardec's questions were being answered, he realized, maybe there's something really important that's happening here. Maybe it's a new philosophy that's being launched. Maybe it's a new religion that's being launched. Maybe it's a new science that I can experiment that's being launched. And then all his background prepared him to be the compiler or the codifier or the encoder. Doesn't matter how we translate that. But Allan Kardec, when he published the Spirits book, he published an amazing compendium of questions and answers. In the first edition was 500 plus. The last edition was 1,019 questions and answers. And then that book, I highly recommend all of us to study, to read. That book is divided into 4 parts. The first part is the first causes, talks to us about God, the general elements of the universe, creation, right? The energy that we have called vital principle and all that. The second part, Kardec talks about the spirit world and the world of the spirits, talking about spirits, incarnation, reincarnation. How as we return or pass away, we go back to the spirit realm, right? All those things, the plurality of existences, life, different planets that we have inhabited life, spirit life, and so forth. And he goes in to talk about the kingdoms, right? And then the third part, he talks to us about moral laws, right? Divine or moral laws, law of work, law of worship, and all that. Taking a step deeper into what Jesus had left us with, right? And then the fourth part, or the concluding part of the book, talks to us about hopes and consolations, right? Earthly joys and sorrows, future joys and sorrows, what are we doing with our lives, future lives, and all those things. It's an amazing compendium that something new was being born. And thanks to Allan Kardec's educational background, he was able to put that all together in order that makes sense, in an order that's easy for us to understand the 4 parts of the book, right? Over time, as we see today, the possibilities even became broader, and Kardec continued dedicating his time, his full time, I should say, right? 100% of his time towards the publication of Spiritist works. Then let's take a look at this picture right here. This is a picture that was taken a few years ago, right? On the Rue de Martyrs in Paris, number 8, the little house with the great door there. Second floor is where the Parisian Society for Spiritist Studies was founded on April 1st, 1858. And then there was the very first Spiritist Center, or Society for Spiritist Studies, I should say, where Kardec really brought logic and brought reasoning towards evaluating texts and helping other organizations throughout France, right, carry out activities and all that. The very first, or the beginning of what we know Spiritism today, is found in this little house, right? As we can even go in and see. It's a very normal neighborhood of Paris, so to speak. So, what were Kardec's main works? This is a picture of his tombstone in the cemetery in Paris. Kardec himself published 12 books. Yes, 12 books plus 11 years of the Spiritist magazine, right? His most famous works, as we know, are the Spirit's book, as we talked about it, the Spiritist Review or magazine that was published between 1858 and 1869. Then he published a very interesting book called What is Spiritism? And here, I think it's important for us to make a parenthesis, right? Still today, there's a lot of prejudice against different religions, different thoughts, and all that. So let's take a step back and look back when Kardec was with us. There was a lot of roadblocks, a lot of challenges with the more commonly institutionalized religions back then, right? The Catholicism and the Protestantism back in the days. So Kardec wrote that book, small book, that really showcases, in a summary, what is this new thing called Spiritism. So much so that in this small book, he talks to us about a way to identify if a person is a Spiritist or not. What would you guys think? Is a person that goes to the Spiritist Center twice, 3 times a week? Can we call that individual Spiritist? Well, according to Kardec, not as quickly, right? Because he says to us from that book that we can recognize the true Spiritist by his or her moral transformation, by the efforts that that person or that individual does to control his or her bad tendencies or inclinations. That tells us that I could be a Spiritist without even going to the Spiritist Center. Absolutely. I could be considered a Spiritist without even having a proper religion, so to speak. 100%. And Kardec talks to us about that. That what's really important is for us to keep transforming ourselves, keep progressing, keep driving, keep moving forward. That should be our motivation for all of our lives. Then he talks to us about the Medium's book. He publishes the Medium's book and talks to us about mediumship. Interesting note about this book is it has a lot of questions and answers, a lot of comments around the practices of mediumship. This is the very first time the word mediumship was ever produced. Kardec coined the term Spiritism, obviously, even though it's not Kardec's Spiritism, right? It's the spirits who created Spiritism. Kardec only put that together, right? But he created the word mediumship in the languages of the world. So the word mediumship was never really created, was never really, thought about before Kardec. Then that book talks to us about all the safe practices, the importance to practice mediumship in a way that's safe, not only for us, but for the folks that are, communicating or listening to the messages and so forth. Then, a couple of years later, he published Spiritism in its simplest expression. In that book also, it starts really reeling in people from other faiths and other religions, even mentioning in that book that you could be a Catholic and a Spiritist. You could be a Muslim and a Spiritist. You could be, yes, those things are not mutually exclusive. And he explained to us in that book. 2 years later, he publishes a Gospel According to Spiritism, which is a compendium of the most important lessons from our teacher, our Professor Jesus, when he was here with us, from the Gospels, in a way that it's easy to learn, easy to read, and with logic behind those teachings, all the parables, the examples that Jesus brought us. Heaven and Hell, an amazing book that talks to us about the concept of heaven and hell, the concept of future life, the concept that we have, what happens to us when we wake up in the spiritual world. And my suggestion here is, if you like soap operas or if you like to read novels, make sure you read this book, because there's a lot of studies, there's a lot of stories rather in this book that talks to us, that tell us about spirits that passed away, that woke up in the spiritual world, look and say, oh, what happened here? I used to be a king. I used to be a queen. I used to be a servant. I used to be a peasant. And look at me now, right? Telling us that all those things that we have here on earth, right? They only matter if they could help us progress spiritually. Nobody's going to ask us when we wake up in the spiritual world, hey, Flavio, what were your religion when you were on earth? Hey, Andrea, what were your religion when you were... No. The questions that are going to be asked us are, what have you done to others that I trusted you with? What have you done to others, to help others, to assist, to be there for them, and so forth? What have you done to progress spiritually, to gain more knowledge, to gain more experience, and all that? And then, from our first place here, if you're into science, if you're into looking at how the world was created, if you're into looking, maybe taking a deeper look into the correlation between science and religion, the Genesis, miracles, and premonitions, according to Spiritism, is highly, highly welcomed study for you guys to go after that. So when Kardec said that he's really bringing this new paradigm, right, a logical paradigm of Spiritism, in the book called Spiritist Journey from 1862, Kardec goes in and starts visiting other Spiritist centers. Same way as, Paul of Tarsus sent letters, visit other Christians. Kardec did that in 1862. Then he's able to really craft the idea that Spiritism is based on facts. Not only facts that Joe Blow no, it's not an individual fact, but it's the fact that we're seeing multiple places. Remember the universal control of the teachings? They were seen multiple places. They were used for humanity. And that those facts had to be based on the reasoning and after a rigorous logic, filter, which gives Spiritism, right, a characteristic of a positivism science or philosophy that really suits our times now, has been suiting our time since its inception, and will be continues to suit our times moving forward, right? Kardec himself will go to say, as his logic, collaborations or contributions, about the triple aspect of Spiritism, right? Spiritism really demonstrates in very logical and rational terms something that today a lot of us do not understand well, which is, why do we suffer? Why is it that it's so difficult right now for my life? Why is it that I have these types of illnesses in my family? Why do I have to overcome X, Y, and Z in my life? When we look at pain overall, my friends, we learn through Spiritism that the cause of our afflictions are either two: things that happen in this life or things that have happened in previous lives. But more than anything else, the purpose of pain is to really help us achieve a better place once we overcome that. I know when we are throughout the pain or throughout suffering, it's very difficult to see the lighthouse at the end of the tunnel. But as Andrea mentioned very clearly in our prayer in the beginning, right? Spiritism removes the blur from our vision, and we see pain with a different set of eyes. The comforting message of Spiritism explains to us that pain is the best for us. That pain that we're suffering, that difficulty that we're suffering, is an instrument for the supreme justice to take place. So how we look at pain, how we look at affliction, how we look at suffering changes. We don't go against God. We don't ask God, why am I going through this? We ask God, what's the lesson behind this, my Creator? Because I know you want my best. I know you want me to be happy. I know you want me to achieve better realms, better places. How is this going to help me get there? And the moment we start asking these questions, the very difficult part of pain or suffering starts to change. The pain itself won't go away, but how we interpret that pain or that suffering changes. That's the comforting message that Spiritism brings to humanity. And then aligned with the fact of reincarnation, aligned with the fact that this is not our only life, we can clearly understand that even if the pain that we're suffering right now is because a loved one departed, a loved one made the journey, we'll see that individual again. That person won't stop loving us. Will not stop loving that person. Right? So this, my friends, gives us a lot of peace through the grieving phases, a lot of peace through the understanding of our reality, and so forth. Right? So Kardec's greatest mission was obviously, right, to build up or to really publish Spiritism, or this, as we like to call it, this progressive body of knowledge that started with Kardec, but has not finished with Kardec, as we learned. But the interesting piece on this is that thanks to Kardec's reputation as a man of integrity, honesty, ethics, culture, his background overall was the main obstacle in which frivolous, spirits and affirmations and all those things people tried to really stop the progress or the advancement of Spiritism. So thanks to Kardec's works, we have today in front of us this amazing body of knowledge, this amazing amount of content that can really bring us a lot of peace, as I mentioned, through our affliction or through our pain. To the point that Kardec dedicated his entire life up to his disincarnation to spread the ideas of Spiritism. And the moment he discarnated, he was actually going out the door. Somebody rang the bell looking for a Spiritist magazine, and he was a victim of a brain aneurysm, and he passed away at the age of 65. So for 15 years, my friends, 15 non-stop years, Kardec dedicated his life towards the spread of Spiritism. We owe it so much to this spirit that we have some background of his previous lives and all that, which is great. But I think my call to action for all of us is that let's be grateful for this amazing spirit that has been here with us, that has helped us really remove all the blur from our vision. And if I could say one thing to wrap us up here, right? The one thing that Kardec mentioned that we should all remember at all times is that it does not really matter what we call ourselves. It does not really matter if we go to the Spiritist Center 5 days a week. It helps, but that's not the only driving factor for us to really achieve salvation, for us to really say, you know what, job well done in this incarnation. My friends, it's charity, rather, because nobody confuses charity. Nobody really argues, oh, this is a charity, it's not charity, right? Imagine if Kardec said, without Spiritism, there's only maybe tens of millions of Spiritists all over the world. What if he said, without Christianity, there's only 2 billion Christians in the world today out of 8 billion. Only 1/4 of the world is Christian. But rather, he was very inspired when he wrote this, asking us to think about how we carry out our lives. Asking us or inviting us to think about the best way, or rather the only way for us to live fulfilling lives is when we think about others, is when we extend our hand to help others who are in need, financially, materially, spiritually, socially, anything, right? People say, oh, I don't have any money to be charitable. We can all say a prayer. We can all send good thoughts. For example, right? Maybe if you don't want to go and help in what's happening in West Florida right now, you can at least say a prayer for those folks that are there. They lost their houses. Some of them lost their lives and so forth, right? Physical lives, rather. So when we look at this, the idea of charity should be the main motivation that we have for all of us throughout our lives, because that's exactly what Jesus did to us. He helped everybody including prostitutes, scoundrels, thieves, and anybody that came to see Jesus, he helped. That should be our mantra. That should be our motivation as Spiritists. Because thanks to Kardec, we can clearly see now, right, how we can get to the next phase, how we can get to the next level. So, our utmost gratitude to this singular human being that has brought so much, not only to us, but to humanity. We haven't even started seeing all the benefits that we learned from Spiritism, that we have been learning from Spiritism for over 170 years. A lot of these sciences are learning about them right now, are discovering them right now. There's so many studies that show that, right? The works of Andrea Lewis is, for example, to name a few. So, my friends, I really hope that this small piece of us tackling Kardec's life and legacy can inspire you to study more about this human being. There's a movie on Netflix. If you saw my very first slide, there's a movie on Netflix that talks to us about his life. Obviously, a lot of allegorations in the movie. There's obviously the biography that we can read. There's many, many things out there available. Let's take the time. Let's honor this great man. And in gratitude, once again, thanks, Andrea. Thanks for the Conscious Living and the Spirits Federation of Florida for inviting us, right, to be here with you in this beautiful morning. Thank you so much.
Wow, Flavio, thank you so much. I'm going to second the opinions of Eloise and Carlos for the great presentation. And in such a way that it kept us locked in and wanting to hear a little bit more, even if we already knew how wonderful it is to revisit the life of Allan Kardec and what he left us. I mean, we a lot of people say, you know, we don't have a manual to go by in life, and we do. There's no wonder it all started with a book of questions and answers, because that's what we have. We seek for answers. We have so many questions. Sometimes I throw one at Marcel, and he's like, "Just go read the Spirits book. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Go look for it." So very, very thankful for what you brought us. And yeah, I don't know if anybody else have any questions here. It is important that we always introduce Allan Kardec to those who are starting with Spiritism right now, who want to know how it all began, and also the book, What is Spiritism? Like our brother Flavio mentioned here, is really, really interesting. There's also a dialogue that he has it's really wonderful. So, anywho, Flavio, I want to take a little bit more advantage of your time, if you don't mind, and ask that if you can do our final prayer, if you feel like it.
Absolutely. It'd be a pleasure. So thanks again, Andrea, and everybody for following us. Let us try to quiet down our thoughts, our emotions, and together let us imagine the figure or the semblance of our teacher, Jesus. First of all, Jesus, we want to thank you for allowing us to have this opportunity through technology to meet friends from different parts of the world. We thank you also for all those things that we have in front of us. We thank you for letting us be the beneficiaries of Kardec's works. But Jesus, we also understand we're so imperfect. There's so much ahead of us that we'd like to ask you to continue blessing us, to continue bringing peace to our hearts and intuition to our minds, so we can make better and better choices in the future. And if I could ask once again, Jesus, would love for you and your life to be our utmost inspiration. And with that, please bring this prayer to our Heavenly Father and Mother God, our Creator, so that we're always under His blessings and His love, that we know He never abandons us. Thank you so much, and amen.
Thank you, Flavio. Please give everyone in Boston our hug. We miss everybody. And also, once again, congratulating the Conscious Living Spiritist group for its 16th year. Our doors are going to be opening very soon. We also want you to know that the Fraternity in Love Spiritist Center, our sister Spiritist Center in Miami, is also going to be opening its door very soon. So things are happening, and like Flavio said, it is important to also attend the Spiritist Center, not only for the knowledge, but also the fraternity that binds us, the strength that it gives us, which really turns out into like a family, especially for those that are far away from their own families. Also, we posted yesterday that we are going to be mobilizing all the efforts to try to assist our brothers and sisters in the West Coast. If you have any ideas, if you have any donations, if you have any questions, you can hit us up at our social media page, either on Instagram or Facebook at Spiritist Federation FL, and we will be more than glad to assist. On that note, we thank you. Later on today at 6 p.m., we have the very same topic, but in Spanish. So if you speak Spanish or you know anyone who only speaks Spanish and you feel that they're going to be able to take advantage of all the information that we learned and we revisited today, it's going to be on at 6 p.m. with Milton Delgado from Colombia, Allan Kardec, Vida y Legado. And so we invite you for that as well. Thank you so much for being with us, and have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thanks, Flavio.
Thank you.